There's a lot of value in honoring a relationship because the relationships of the systems, the digestive system, respiratory system, cardiac system, these are just synchronized energetic actions inside of our body that when in right alignment and the rhythmic intelligence is all aligned, we fire up to our potential. And the way in which we establish trust is our ability to actually be embodied and in connection. If we lose that compass, we could lose our humanity. The value is that we're human for a reason. While we may have a demon or a god or a spirit, that is only discernible through a relationship with human, which then brings it into 3D, which brings it into time space, which puts it in a certain frequency and cadence, which makes it discernible. Yes, consciousness can be disembodied. Yes, things can be simulated. Yes, we may have souls. And that trajectory of thought is an open-ended one. It's wake up, grow up, show up. It's also wake up, stay awake, find the others.
This is the Human Future podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and spirituality with some of the world's brightest minds. Together, we paint a vision of the desirable future and discuss the actionable steps to make that vision a reality. And now, without further ado, let's begin. Today's guest is Kodah Pipitone, who is an accomplished entrepreneur and futurist, working at the intersection of technology, social impact, and conscious living. Koda is involved with various organizations and initiatives focused on using innovation to drive positive change in the world. And now, enjoy the show. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Super excited, man, to dive into some of the topics with you. I mentioned earlier, as I was doing research, watching some interviews with you before, I was recognizing how almost like how much the world is missing more of you out there sharing your ideas, because you have so much to say, and your eloquence of communicating ideas and being able to, I think language in general is a tool for manifestation. Just having more of you out there bringing change in the world through your ability to communicate and having those wide, like really broad spectrum ideas that you have.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
that's quite an intro, and I'll strive to live up to that frame. But for me, I do invest heavily in personal development and initiatory processes. So, in that work, I have looked in the mirror, as your studio is allowing now.
Yeah.
Often, and I've had great men and women hold up the mirror to me for inspection, where then was revealed patterns of behavior and thought. In initiatory practices, if that's ceremonial or experiential of any kind, where I just get through the self into that gnosis, I've experienced the ways in which my mind moves. So now I am intentional about diagnosing when it's moving well and when it's not. So because of those two inputs, I've experienced a lot of development in how I think in a short period of time. And I think that this field of where neuroscience meets psychology, meets ideology and conversation, this is a space that's being defined. It's not biohacking. And it's not peak performance. It's something about what it means to be human and where are the upper limits and where are they moving, because they are moving. And clearly traditional education isn't generating people who are autodidactic, but it can.
What is autodidactic?
Self-taught. We learn how we learn, and then we love learning. There's another frame that Tom Bilyeu talks about of Anti-Fragile, where he talks about adopting the identity of a learner. You know, if someone throws critique at your face and you pick it back up as a gift, and that it's anti-fragile, and that you don't stop being a learner when you're wrong. So I stand for the truth, and a conversation really is meant to get to the truth.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to do with you today.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Just to give listeners or whoever is watching a reference, could you give a little bit of a backstory of how you ended up doing who you are today, some of the instrumental points on that timeline that defined your character?
I'd love to. Yeah. So I think a good foundation is I grew up on a horse farm working in the fields with my father and brother, fixing tractors and fixing fences. It taught me how to work hard. And then obviously I went to school in the big city in New York because I wanted something different. And studied philosophy, world religions, ethics. Traveled the world. Then I bought into a worker cooperative. It was a really prominent space in the East Coast in Baltimore City called Red Emma's Worker Cooperative, where I was introduced to political innovation and governance, and then economic innovation and worker ownership, and then non-extractive debt. And we actually launched a second cafe, and we held events. It was a big space, 300 person, and a big bookstore and a school that was free. So I got exposed to a lot of what's called radical, or getting to the root ideas, and I facilitated a lot of intellectual conversations between authors and politicians. There was an uprising in Baltimore at that time, and I was facilitating conversations between the Department of Justice and street-level survival sex workers and the mayor's office.
Wow.
What? As the person who was the barista, but also owned that cafe partially. So I was that was the first thrust into the public space that I had. I had a nonprofit at the time. Then I moved into entrepreneurship as a stronger lever to affect change. And I started building software for social workers and homeless services. Really interesting. I went through the OSI fellowship at Johns Hopkins Social Innovation Lab, and I really learned how to identify value and deliver that value to people that could use it and use it to impact more people. So social workers on the front lines, like if I really care about homelessness, they should not be using software from 1995. This work got me on the map of World Economic Forum, and I got scouted by the Global Shapers, as we were talking about earlier. That put me in contact with a lot of mentors and gave me access to their strategic intelligence and top link platforms, which are essentially a powerful research tool and a filtered LinkedIn database where people are more apt to take introductions. That exploded my career. Summit Series picked me up as a fellow, so I got to go to their flagships for free for 2 years.
Amazing. Wow.
And I joined the Fellows Board of Alumni. Still on that today. As it reforms into a new project, which is really interesting. I encourage you to keep your eyes on Summit Impact. I shifted from homeless services software to consumer wearable devices after a deep insight that the root cause of houselessness is not being at home in our bodies. And how could we help people be home in their bodies, but bring any kind of device that could help people track their biometrics and serve them and being more grounded. So I was a big nerd about the Elra Ring, and there was a heart math device and all these different gadgets. And I just, it was called Soyana Technologies, and we designed these products, some really fun stuff.
What kind of products?
All kinds of wearable technology. We had a fidget spinner ring that was tracking your fidgeting habits for a startup. We had a DJ, kind of an MDI controller for modifying sound, but it was a bracelet so that they would dance and the dancing would affect the sound in real time. And their ultimate vision was to have 4 dancers on the dance floor and who's the DJ. And it was this collaborative movement thing that created, right? I still want to do it for them, but they ran out of capital during the lockdowns. But the lockdowns, that forced me to dissolve the software company, and I chose to dissolve the wearables company because cost of capital for hardware products, VC was not deploying, and governments were not spending on new software because everything was going towards pandemic management. I moved into the COVID Alliance. I got recruited and did some work for free for them for that time. And then I decided to really reset. And that involved selling my house in Baltimore that I built from the ground up, dissolving the 2 companies and hitting the road with a, carry-on hard shell roller bag. And that 2 years of traveling all the sacred sites and all the initiatory experiences, I shifted into investing. And I was advising family offices on a different thesis. And I was helping develop those theses. I got recruited by a fund of funds in Dubai, and then formed a partnership with some family offices in Los Angeles. Very sophisticated, learned a lot about economics and about the challenge of deploying capital, de-risked, and with some kind of influence or impact, which I'd love to unpack what that even means later. I stepped away from the fund of funds last year and have been doing work with a family office right now. which is really interesting. And my core thesis for the opportunities that I present and the people I connect is in edge tech deployment, frontier technology. If it's in Star Trek, it's also here today. It's just an economic incentive strategy. That's why it's not in our hands today. So we focus on energy, transportation, and consumer devices. And I get to meet with thought leaders around the world in that space and connect people together to create value. So long answer, but the throughput is social entrepreneur turned investor, rational futurist.
Yeah, amazing. Wow. It does feel like there is a underlying thread of search for answers. Like you were just trying a lot of different things because you were searching for what answers were you looking for?
What is this?
Right.
I get that this is a suit, a space suit. I don't mean an outer space suit. I mean a spatial engine for rendering what we call space-time and perception. I studied metaphysics, can you tell, and philosophy in undergrad, and I went into those questions, and I wasn't even using substances to get into those questions. I was in those questions in a rigorous formal context. So later, when I began work with the Indigenous and really unraveled the default network and how we make sense of our sensory perceptions and got to experience non-ordinary consciousness, I then had the tools to reassemble it. So for me, integration was always a process of installing the updates and upgrading the system and then operating at that level. So I've had the fortune of doing it in the right order. And I think that that's informed. I'm still asking the same questions, but I understand how to measure my progress where I don't get lost in the sauce. I don't get disintegrated. And we could talk a lot about hedonic engineering and hedonic calendaring, which is a concept that I learned from the Flow Genome Project and Jamie Wheel. And it's very useful when engaging with any technology that involves our consciousness and how to make sure we use the right tools for the job. Yeah. So that question of what is this is still driving me. And the subsidiary question would be, what could this be?
Right. So, I mean, you've got a lot of insights on your journey of you tried something over there. Oh, this is not. This is, oh, life is this way, that way. What is the most updated version of your framework of what's happening?
Humans are meaning-making machines. The world is this way because we believe it's so. Within that, I have access to more accountability than in previous frames. So when I see something wrong in the world and I use the word them to describe what's going on, I immediately know that's me giving power away. And in fact, that's me. And this separation isn't. So when we can get past that, when I can get past that and actually be in relationship with this abstraction of them and transform it into specific people, names, institutions, legacy, artifacts of legislation and economic traction, I can then understand how to operate and build partnerships and affect change. So what that looks like in the past was, when I was in that, before I got into entrepreneurship, I was more nonprofit policy change, and there's a victim and there's a hierarchy of oppression, and we need to get the people benefiting to have reparations. And I was essentially storming the gates of the castle. When I shifted my belief, I scheduled an appointment with the king and had a great productive conversation and did some business. Right? And to this day, mimetic evolution is faster than biological evolution. So while I get that the king is just another guy, just a brother over there going through life, my biology hasn't updated to the fact that there's structured power and relationships far bigger than my body. So the first thing that I had to do was exposure. to people who hold structural power to tune into the nervous system, to be able to be in those conversations and have it and be fully online, to actually be in the conversation, to not be nervous, to not be, to not constrict my cognitive faculties to the point where I'm not effective. Right? And in so doing, I found flow. And in so doing, I meet people with influence. And if I don't know something, I believe I can know it. Right? And believing I can know it has resulted in me not too long thereafter knowing. And then also contributing and moving forward. So, maybe take this wherever you want to go, but I hope I answered your question of what's your current frame.
Yeah.
And I think just it was simply, we believe.
It also, what I've heard is this unified consciousness that we are all one entity and there's no them. It's just another version of me. It's a happening. It's just a one big happening, right?
100%. So there are different stages. I do put a lot of merit behind non-dualism. And let me just provide some architecture so folks can kind of grok onto what I'm saying. Because mimetic just means ideas, right? But hedonic engineering is any ecstatic technology. So an ecstatic technology can be breath work, can be a exogenous substance, can be an endogenous process that gets you past the ego. So in consciousness, there is non-dual awareness. And the thing about non-dual awareness is there's no polarity, so there's no action. Right? In non-dualism, nothing's already always happening. So don't worry about it. Right? Nothing's already always happening. So what am I? No, nothing's already always happening, so I am. So it's hard to then move conversations forward when we keep going into non-dualism as the answer to what consciousness is. Yes, we are all a unified field. Yes, there is more knowledge to construct to understand more of what quantum uncertainty and quantum superposition are. And there's hard science in that. And yet, the study of polarity, i.e. relationships, is super valuable. I'm a big student of Est, and Est came up in the 50s, 60s when there was a big rise in secular self-initiation in the culture. It became the counterculture. People tuned in, dropped out of the economy and their families and their life and their responsibility because those initiatory technologies were outside of theological institutions. And so the churches weren't giving the Eucharist, the synagogues weren't offering, right? And because the mosques weren't gathering, then people were just self-initiating and they didn't have the dogma that contains that knowledge to then operate it in the world. We used to go to church on Sunday, go to work on Monday. Now we're just going to church every day. It doesn't mean church is dirty. It means that maybe we're not in right relationship. So from Est, this conversation, it later intentionally broke into Landmark, LifeSpring, and Sterling Institute. And then LifeSpring became MITT, and then Landmark is still operating. And they have some strengths and weaknesses, some really good linguistic tech. The world's made of words. If you know the words, you can make the world. So I'm in Sterling Institute relationship now. It's a secret, sacred place. So there's a lot that it can only be experienced by being there. But what I am getting is the power of relationships. Because there's polarity, and through that exchange of energy, this is possible. Arguably, those polarities are completely arbitrary. When I'm talking to you, I'm talking to all that is not me. So I'm talking to the world. And when I'm talking to my girlfriend, I'm talking to the entire divine feminine. And when I'm embodying the masculine, I'm enabling that intimate relationship because it's clear what technologies are being embodied. And when we start making complex stacks of polarity, then we have to figure out the way to cuddle together because it's not as simple. Right? And this is in the neo-identity formation space and the gender politics. This is a lot in the U.S. commodified identity culture where we have just complexity in relationship. And I love innovation. Let's go. And also workability. Does it work? So I know I'm going on at length about your about your question,
Yes.
but relationships are how I come back down from we are all one.
Uh-huh.
Because yes, we're all one, but we
Yes.
chose to make two. We chose to have a mirror, and then in that mirror, we chose to find source again through the eyes of another, such that a third thing is possible, and that third thing's not possible when we are all one. That third thing is love. And within love, you have the birth. It's the womb. We're all a new creation, right? And that can be literally childbirth, or that can just be the bond that we're building now. And without that, the monad, the thought of non-dual awareness in the vacuum, when it becomes self-aware, it's immediately lonely. And then it seeks the reflection. So
wow, what a deep reflection on this duality, importance of and usefulness of the perspective of duality that you have. Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. I do also recognize that importance. The whole 3D world there are a lot of useful, there are concepts, they're not real, but it's useful to consider them, because it's like this platform on which we exist. It's like we're living on the platform of culture and ethereal like things that don't really have a physical per se form, but you could still value them, like
100%.
right.
The realness of an idea related to its density derived from how many others are enrolled. If I continue to enroll people in the vision of my startup, besides we can interrogate the dopamine hit from that process and why a lot of startups don't get started, because they're addicted to the dopamine of the idea as opposed to the action. But if I enroll enough people and then we transact an action or currency, eventually that idea will materialize. That enrollment will deepen the density of that idea, and then that idea will materialize. And this is just the underlying philosophical mechanisms of pulling the vision into the reality. And there's one process of visioning it internal in the dream, and we all go to night school, and we refine our ideas, and our nervous system calibrates, and then we anchor our yes to that, and then we enroll others. But when I then enroll someone else's vision in that, it's no longer an internal process. Now it's an external thing that we can have an AR goggles on and watch it and then refine it, right? And then we can build it. And this is why relationships are important. But I do think that there is realness to this material reality insofar as everyone I've ever met is enrolled in it. Right. So when people talk about divergent metaphysics, it's useful to have mimetic innovation around these metaphysics, but its realness is different. Right. You can enroll a whole community in the fact that we're on a flat earth, and you could operate, and I'm sure there might be some unique insights, just like an LLM has these golem abilities. I'm sure that the unique tribe of divergent metaphysics in believers could have some interesting non-ordinary psychic abilities emerging in their community because they have code synced into a language that's atypical and then has unique benefits. But then they come and have to pay their taxes and they're on the wrong calendar day. So there's something about workability where it's just important to know, like, yes, I can go and study with the Ashaninka for a month in the Amazon, and I can experience pure ecstasis. I can experience a shared dreaming process and see, what's that movie, Kung Fu Hustle, where they're playing soccer in the air? Like I can see essentially these people playing Pong in their imaginations during ceremony, like it's Tuesday. But to then come back to the States and tell somebody that I experienced this and was literally playing an imaginary video game in the clouds with some Indigenous without speaking English together, they're going to think that I've lost it. Now, if you give us some more time and we learn more about the consensus science, perhaps there is some kind of neurological synchrony observable between all of our brains during that process. And perhaps we were mirror neuroned and synced up so much that we were actually thinking as one group mind. Right?
Totally.
And that's the human potential piece. And that's that intersection I was pointing to earlier between biohacking and neuroscience and spirituality. And there's a lot of juice to squeeze in that conversation.
Yeah, can we go there? Yeah, double click on that one. Yeah. What has been some exciting new discoveries, thoughts, experiences that you've been wrapping your mind around, and just like something novel for you in those spaces?
Yeah, so the most immediate thing isn't as on the money to what you're asking.
Yeah.
It's around quantum computer infrastructure, where I'm learning a lot very rapidly pertaining to an opportunity, and there's some exclusivity around that. But just generally speaking, the amount of usable qubits is increasing rapidly in the hardware space, which will reduce the commercial costs to these machines, and we'll see a lot more of them. And what that means spiritually and metaphysically is, I think, interesting. And I encourage folks interested to trust experts who have pedigree in the space, because there are non-obvious known knowns in the space that if you don't know them, you go off into a divergent, belief around what's possible.
Like what? Give me some examples. Yeah.
We're not going to summon a demon. We're not going to open a portal. We're not going to... There is something useful about having an unobserved state and being able to parallel compute multiple vectors of computation across a qubit. Something useful in that. And that utility will be expressed likely in logistics, in training AI, in discovering novel pharmaceuticals, in solving complex problems. And it may be useful in creating a new type of networking, new type of protocol for networking that could have an effect on what we perceive of as time in relation to the construction of digital experiences. And that's interesting. I'm not really qualified to go into that too far, but I think there's some really interesting things that you'll see played out in a lot of media. And we can poke at quantum, but I just want to say that a lot of people in quantum don't know what quantum means. Non-duality is not quantum. It exists in polarity, and it's math. However, my internal experience may in fact be a quantum simulation, and understanding that. And then the conversation about relationship reminds us that we're in a 3D world, and we're communicating across that internal experience, and that's where the juice is. So there's something there that's really interesting. I would just say stay tuned for the cost of these systems to drastically decrease, and the ability to innovate technology. We'll now have the possibility of creating really interesting stuff. Magician's Apprentice. Should we? Right? The Magician's Apprentice, for those who don't know, summoned the whole cleaning spell, and the magician was away, and they didn't know how to turn off the spell. Just let the genie out of the box. So then he had the magician had to come and figure out, because the cleaning spell started cleaning, then destroying the house, then cleaning it again, destroying the house, right? So we could do a lot of things, but should we? So I'm also just to kind of bring it back to something that might be more on the money and more related to the preceding thread that brought us to this question. I think there's some really useful stuff in the dematerialization of devices. So AR and wearables. My children will not be hunched over screens.
Right.
Their retinas will not be fried by backlit screens, and they will not experience the rapid context shifting, which is the main driver of addiction to screens. What I mean by that is suddenly I'm in a desert, suddenly I'm in a mountain, suddenly I'm in a... These screens are addictive because our evolutionary wiring for novelty and for resource acquisition, food and sex, was anchored to traveling long distances to different bioregions, and we've hacked that with the context shifting available through media and the immersion into the trance of consuming from a screen. Right. So I think this is not good, and I think this is a stepping stone in what this technology really is. Most of our digital comms can come through an AR device. The Humane has it on a pin that's just voice-based. I can see a very near-term world where we all have a sort of glasses and a sort of watch
Yes.
that has all the computing power needed.
Right. Or access to computing power needed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I can see server capacity being a utility
Mm-hmm.
in every building on every city block.
Right.
You just tether in with
Right.
the rise in encryption. So quantum does have an impact on encryption in a big way.
Right.
So I can see really, really durable encryption, really, really seamless
Yes.
tethering, and ubiquitous AI, ubiquitous digital participation.
Yes.
I can see even ethical global utilities for the human-computer interface as a service.
Yes.
I can see it being part of taxes or subscription nation states or network states. And in that space, the acceleration in innovation
Mm-hmm.
through you've all used Miro, you've all maybe used some other mind mapping tools.
Mm-hmm.
If our conversation right now was visually overlaid into our 3D environment
Yes.
and we had our AI companion trained on our strength and yours on yours, and then
Right.
them collaborating to highlight where we should go next in the conversation,
Right.
I could see us getting to the truth, like,
Right.
and I would have a blast. I'm
Yes.
kind of doing that because I use my brain spatially as much as possible.
Yeah.
I've trained with like memory palace stuff.
Mm.
But I think that it's good for everyone to have access to those skills.
Mm.
And if that's facilitated by devices, that's good
Mm.
at first.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to keep going on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's there's a lot there to unpack for sure. So let me kind of bring it back. So, because a lot of thought came to mind as you were sharing it. Yeah.
Here's the piece that might help bring it
Yes.
back. So when the technology advances, there's also an atrophy in the skills that technology couldn't do previously. So
Yes.
we used to navigate the city. Now we use map programs.
Yes.
We used to, in the near future, we used to navigate conversation. Now we use AI assistants.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something as a cost to these
Yes.
training wheels
Yes.
when we forget that they're training wheels.
Right.
If we continue to hold technology in support of the human experience and relationships,
Yes.
we win. Biodiversity wins. Civilization cultivates beyond Earth.
Mm-hmm.
If we become subservient to technology,
Mm-hmm.
then our infrastructure wins. I don't think any kind of humanoid infrastructure. I think infrastructure wins, and we become essentially subservient to our containment systems that we rely on.
Mm-hmm.
So what that looks like is we can have the cool tools as long as we can do it when they break,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? How many of our friends know another friend's phone number? How many of our friends know how to navigate without Google Maps?
Right.
How many of in the near future, how many writers will be able to write without a GPT editor? How many legal aids can draft contracts without an AI now?
Right.
Without a template now. So I want to advocate for developing hard skills, and I referenced flow genome already, but that's going outdoors and wayfinding,
Mm-hmm.
learning how our biological spacesuit operates in the wilderness,
Mm-hmm.
learning how we operate as humans without devices, such that we can use our devices better.
Right. I've always believed and thought that the most advanced technology is the one that's least noticeable. And you're kind of speaking of the same thing, like miniaturizing tech. It becomes smaller and smaller and less noticeable, but it's becoming more and more advanced.
Yes.
Also at the same time. So do you see the future then where we live a more primitive lifestyle where there is also another layer of augmentation that's not physically noticeable, but it's all in our minds type thing?
I love this thread.
Yeah.
So I see the future a little bit closer to Star Wars and a little further from Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek was ultimately a political allegory, and they just extrapolated the race and class divisions into literal alien races and other worlds.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to look at different governments. There was the Borg versus these Federation. It was the U.S. versus China. It was Russia. It was communism versus capitalism. So I think in Star Wars you see the role of spirituality a lot more with this Jedi, based on Jedi from Egypt, and Skywalkers based on Theravada Buddhism. So there's a lot of direct references to the sources that he's creating from.
Mm-hmm.
And I see our future as that. Notice they don't have cell phones. Notice they can still use their intuition. And notice they're still in dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
As far as devices, I don't think they're going away. I think that they are, like I said, dematerializing. As far as products,
Isn't that though the if they're dematerializing,
jewelry,
then the devices are disappearing?
Well, with the constraint being humans love adornment. So one earring will be all you need.
Right.
There's a really interesting company that has a wearable mouth pad that is right now an assisted device for paraplegics, but it's right now like a layer that goes on your roof, like a retainer.
Mm-hmm.
But the U.S. military wants that for soldiers to use their AR headsets. In the near future, the prototype timeline has it being condensed down to a grill, like a little tooth covering.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that being a consumer product in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm actively helping that team right now.
Cool.
And it's augmental.tech. And I think that's already been showcased as well in the Amazon show called Peripheral. But that's an example of dematerialization. It'll become jewelry. It'll become beautiful. It'll become adornment. We want to adorn ourselves. We want to adorn our lovers. And there's also tattoos and subdermal implants. But what we haven't touched on, because we've been in the device space, is medical technology. And I think that a lot of our DNA is ready to express, but we have to align with it. So biodiversity is not just out there. Biodiversity is inside of us. And we have massive ecosystems of microorganisms throughout our body, and we can cultivate and stack and inoculate and exercise all of these different communities, and that's, I think, where some of our potential will begin, like really begin to express. We have to go as a Homo sapien to a new environment and allow our drivers to adapt for us to know what we're capable of. And if you look at Ad Astra, it's a pretty scientifically researched Hollywood film with Brad Pitt. But they go to Mars, and you'll notice that the cranial size and some of the eyes are a little bit atypical on the people who were born on Mars. And that's the gravitational effect, right? We have constraints and payoffs with how our species is currently evolved around cranial size and the birth canal, and a neonatal human essentially comes out of the womb prematurely and then has 6 months of complete dependency, and we can go into the psychological development of females as a result of that. It's a whole conversation. Actually, Jordan Peterson talks about this at length in a recent podcast. But it's a very interesting thing to look at, like medical technology. Our brains are capable of more, but we constrain them because of how we're born. I'm not saying be born different. I'm saying maybe there's ways to continue the development, neurogenesis. Maybe there's ways of inoculating for not just not vaccinating, more inoculating resiliencies. Maybe there are ways of inoculating for traits, for increased cognitive ability or increased empathy. We're on the precipice of peptides and stem cells. We're on the precipice.
Right.
We have advances in tissue engineering and cloning that are ethically restricted by international agencies, but the technology is ready. So lots there. I think that we're going to become much more of a functional representation of our divine capacity as soon as we get our incentives in place to incentivize good behavior. Right. And that comes from dialogue to align what good means. And yet, ideological diversity is important. So I can go down all these rabbit holes, but let's come back in. So I think medical technology is an area, and then devices will become adornments.
Can we explore the topic of becoming more and more cyborgs? Our devices becoming an extension of ourselves, and extrapolating that trend. One might assume that at some point we will end up having no biological parts anymore, and how do you see that future of like extrapolating that trend?
I love it. So, and I have a sense that some of your listeners are more in the meditation, yoga, anti-screen community. Yes. So I want to say that there's the higher order cities have yet to be supported by our devices. So the city referring to the abilities that come from heightened stillness and the subtle sensitivities and distinctions available in more fragile information. So that the gurus and yogis will acquire cities and then deploy them. A really good speaker will hold the room or hold the center well, and then understand the center and who's falling in and out of it, and be able to maneuver subtly in the energy and in their language to then re-enroll the room. These are cities. And in also temperature variation and transaction with the environment is a city. It's like Wim Hof exploits that in his content. So I think that this concept of becoming cyborg is more of a manifestation of fear. Cyborg refers to a cybernetic network. The fact that we have cell phones by definition makes us cyborgs. The fact that we have telecommunications in general makes us cyborgs. Cybernetic is another one that it's a famous Arnold Schwarzenegger quote that Tim Ferriss uses in his intro. And that's, he's a cybernetic organism. I think that living tissue is critical. So I mean, morphic autonomy, you can do what you want with your body. If you want a tattoo, have a tattoo. If you want plastic surgery, get your implants. If you want a third arm, get your third arm. If you want a genital surgery, get that. Like, have a ball, go on your journey, right? I don't know where your Mount Doom is. I don't know where your Rohan is. I don't know your map. So go on your journey. Bilbo Baggins. But I think that there's a lot of value in honoring a relationship with this, because the relationships of the systems, we can refer to them as the chakras. It's just a communication tool, but the digestive system, respiratory system, cardiac system, these are just energetic, synchronized energetic actions inside of our body that, when in right alignment and the rhythmic intelligence is all aligned, we fire up to our potential. And there's something, I think, naive in interrupting those processes. For example, if you're looking at a mystic who's giving you awesome content, but they're talking at a weird rate, or they have muscle tension, their antenna might be out of tune, and they might actually be downloading some pretty dissonant truth that doesn't actually integrate. And the way in which we establish trust is our ability to actually be embodied and in connection. So when we bring in new artifacts of the future and our body's not quite ready, trust that. And if we lose that compass, we could lose our humanity. So there's a lot there, but I think that the value is that we're human for a reason, and all of the theological scripture will point to this relationship between the human and the divine. And that the theology it's ideology. It's an evolutionary growth from our biology. So it's in relationship. And if we don't treat our human well, we might lose that signal. I can go into some of these concepts around what Moloch is versus what Satanism is or Luciferianism is. I think they're useful in the compass, and they're Judeo-Christian in the language, but they're just conceptually valuable. I think that I believe that there are the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So when a good initiative scales, there will be bias that creates gaps in their intention, or i.e. shadow, and then we label that shadow as bad when it wasn't intended, right? Like, that shadow is not me, it's my shadow. It looks like a person, but it's not a person, it's a shadow. So when those shadows get really big and take the shape of a person or a conspiring group of people, we often personify a shadow as an agent. This is called Moloch. Moloch is that personification of the shadow. And I think that this is really valuable. So while people trying to solve a medical malady or enhance communication with digital tools or hardware tools
Yeah.
may have the unintended consequence of pulling us out of alignment with our divinity,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that that was their conspiring intention,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yep.
It doesn't mean that they're the them out
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
That's us.
Yes.
And we can do better, and we're in that together. So
Right.
I hope that people hear that as a bit of a hedge against fear and
Mhm.
accelerationism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always also was a proponent of conscious use of technology and bringing as much awareness in the way we use technology and not being afraid of it, and understand that you are the one who is putting the intent or the agency into the usefulness of it. Yeah. So the consciousness topic.
Yeah.
So the cyborg thread, and then so biological vessel that we're in, is that the prerequisite for consciousness?
Oh, interesting. Well, do plants have consciousness?
Are
you an animist?
Or like a biological matter, is that the prerequisite for?
Have you been to Japan?
I haven't.
Fushimi Inari Taisha. It's a mountain covered in these orange torii gates. And the mountain has an identity, and the mountain talks to you, and they talk to the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Does the mountain have consciousness?
I believe that everything has consciousness. Even the rock has consciousness.
So that's a type of animism, and I think that's important. Like, so, is that verifiable? Is that falsifiable?
Mm-hmm.
Is any finding that supports that claim replicable? Maybe not.
Mm-hmm. Not yet.
Is that
maybe.
right? Mm-hmm. Is that a powerful belief? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that create the humility necessary to operate in relationship
Mm-hmm.
with more expressions of life? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if the purpose of consciousness is relationship, then being an animist makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe the purpose of consciousness is different, what will your behavior be? Will you be a materialist and accumulate? Will you be some kind of philanthropist, high on compassion?
Yeah.
And then in the shadows of that, they weaponize that compassion to create in and out groups and then leverage that for political agendas. There's all kinds of reasons, but consciousness, let me hear your question again around consciousness.
Maybe a more useful frame would be, say, human consciousness, where it's a thing with which you can have a dialogue, let's say.
Yeah.
It's not a mountain that you perceive, yes, it has consciousness, but you can't really have like a dialogue like we are having now. Yes, you have maybe a different type of dialogue, but the one that I'm more interested in, where you are, even with AI, you have some kind of dialogue there.
Sure.
So in order for us to truly say there is this human consciousness, not the imitation of it, but the actual one that has the connection to the source, is our body required to contain that?
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. The human body's relationship to consciousness, if we accept that that is true, then being in relationship to other human bodies gets us closer to the truth. If the consciousness that we're engaged with is not connected to the human body, then being in a relationship with that disengaged consciousness gets us closer to something else. And is that something else the truth or not requires a level of discernment that may not be available with our current tools.
Mm-hmm.
However, cultures throughout time immemorial have engaged with spirits, angels, deities, devas.
Mm-hmm.
And in that space, there are formalized protocol for engaging as such. Right? A mantra summons up an entity that then you embody in a Kundalini Kriya, and then you are that. And you can use that in the Western frame for less anxiety or more, conviction or courage. But you're calling in this deva through these vibrational sounds that align your systems and produce that state, which is referred to as this disembodied consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But it can equally be referred to as a state. Does that consciousness have opinions? Or is that consciousness a state that then in relationship with the human form can generate opinions?
Right.
So there's a positionality of a disembodied consciousness in the frame of relationships that I think is useful to remember. That while we may have a demon or a god or a spirit, that is only discernible through relationship with human, which then brings it into 3D, which brings it into time space, which puts it in a certain frequency and cadence, which makes it discernible. Otherwise, it's abstraction. And I think that if we want to go into abstraction and see if an artifact is real, then we get into just mathematics, and the mathematics can barely even describe it. So, yeah, so a good example could be a person who's passed away. We can measure the weight differential when the kinetics of a body are no longer operating and the pounds are lost.
Right.
Does that mean that there was a spirit, or does that mean there was a pattern of biological transactions that are no longer occurring, so the kinetic energy is no longer focused on those vectors, so we can measure it as a loss of weight?
It's probably both.
Right. So is that patterning a consciousness that's inhabiting the body? You know, everything in me wants to believe, and then everything in me would, if I do believe that, it opens up the possibility for a digital heaven or a digital purgatory. In accepting that there's a spirit, then there can also be a replica, or a digital world with a simulation where that's happening. And, you know, people like Elon Musk say we're in a simulation.
Right.
And when I first touched that idea, when I was maybe 20, 21, I encountered a safety cord my friend delivered called Turtles All the Way Down.
Okay.
If we're in a simulation, then in this simulation we'll eventually be able to make simulations.
Right.
And in that simulation they'll eventually be able to make simulations. And these turtles will keep going all the way down.
Yes.
This comes from an ancient indigenous belief. We're on Turtle Island. And that's what they were referring to. It's Turtle Island, and then all the way down is turtles and turtles and turtles and turtles and turtles as far as you want to go. So, yes, consciousness can be disembodied. Yes, things can be simulated. Yes, we may have souls. And that trajectory of thought is an open-ended one. So, how's your breathing? How's your heart? You know?
I guess maybe a related question that's often people would ask, will we ever get to the time where we'll be able to upload consciousness onto a computer? So
yeah. Oh, man. My first ever Summit Series event, not making this up, I had a friend share with me a couple slide decks for some of his portfolio companies. And I'll leave some of the names out, but one of them was measuring a Qigong glove that you did a set of movements and it captured the energy coming out of the hand. And then the other one was scraping all digital artifacts of individuals and making an AI avatar that essentially, you know, was trained on your artifacts and then could act as you.
Yes.
And then they had some other technology to make digital twins. So they were basically making a digital avatar that had like your vibe, your behavior patterns, and your aesthetic. And it was a quest for digital immortality.
Then what's the delta? That's what I'm interested about. Yeah.
So like how valid is that in comparison to if I was talking to that versus talking to me right now? There's a project called Bina. I think it's Bina 49. Martine Rothblatt. She's a famous kind of transhumanist, highest paid female CEO in the world, and I would say medically female CEO in the world. So she's a transsexual woman who built Sirius Satellite Radio, now is the CEO of United Therapeutics, which is in the business of tissue engineering and replacement organs. They run a carbon negative building in Maryland with the first floor dedicated to a museum on how to make more buildings like this. Wow. It's a 12-story building that houses pharmaceutical production and tissue engineering operations at a net negative energy cost.
Wow.
So check out Martine Rothblatt. She's also a big investor in electric vertical transit. Her wife was also a futurist and transhumanist, and 10 years before she died, started recording every day for several hours with this AI system that was then trained to be more and more like her. It was like Replica, but before its time, the app Replica. By the time she passed, it was indistinguishable from her behaviorally, and they made an animatronic robot of her that to this day teaches ethics classes at a university.
Really?
Really.
Why this story is not like so well known?
There's so many stories that you can find out there. So look up, I think that the initiative not Tirasai Initiative, about Martine Rothblatt and her wife Bina. It's a little bit creepy because is that a tomb? I don't think it's a tomb. I think it's a digital twin.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, free will choice will have deviated the living Bina from the digital clone of Bina.
Mm-hmm.
And the second that the replication process completed and there's no longer inputs from the living Bina, there's deviation, and that delta increased.
Mm-hmm.
So if we believe that the energetic blueprint of an individual or the soul or the spirit is, then we must accept that the cloned transhumanist expression, digital expression of that, is a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question inside of that is, could we build another vehicle to tune in our consciousness after our bodies passed away?
Okay.
And that's explored in the peripheral. They make these pilots, basically like a humanoid vehicle. It has some kind of synthetic material.
Mm-hmm.
And they have headsets where you can go into it and use a surrogate, and you can be in. Oh, it's cool. I'm in a different location. And then the whole plot is, no, it's not a different location. These are quantum devices, and you're in a different time. And it was this whole thing where they explore the plot of, could you move into another time when we have quantum data encryption and they're sending data into the future to pilot these humanoid robots that look like you, feel like you. So could you then get a person who's passed away and bring them into the body of this? First of all, they'd probably be pretty angry. Right. Second of all, I believe that when we move out of relationship, out of 3D relationship into non-dual awareness, we're no longer aggregated in the same pattern. We're back in the sauce.
Yes.
So to then find that exact composite of energy and bring it back in, it's like, no, you've already put the drop of water in the ocean. How do you get the same drop of water back out? Right? Unless you're a deva, unless you've achieved certain levels of initiation in your rainbow body and you leave your body intentionally, maybe you keep your form in disembodied state, which is the whole process of the asanas and yoga, then maybe you can reincarnate and they'll find you and appoint you the next Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
But most sapiens in this lap around the sun aren't at that level of fidelity with their energy and precision with their energy. And it seems to be an accumulated trait over generations of reincarnations. Not saying you can't do it, not saying we're not evolving to where we can all do it, but I love to believe that this is it. And and I can wrap up in this in a second, but it's wake up, grow up, show up. It's also wake up, stay awake, find the others. This is Jamie Wheal again. But it's about having the non-ordinary experience, dying before you die, staying awake, because we know this whole game is possible, and all these ideas we're talking about are only possible if we're awake. If we die, we don't know that we have the same sensory and communication relationship abilities as we do now. So keep your video game character alive to keep playing the game, and then find the others. So I think that should be motivating to encourage people to stay awake. And when I hear too much intellectualization down the what if we could come back, what if we are in multiple realities, I hear a move away from here and now.
Right, the importance of the now.
And I would just engage that diagnostically first.
Wow, yeah. This is a lot, man.
Yeah. I know I got a little intellectual horsepower behind me, but that's a cool. I hope that landing was smooth. So it's like cool thought, but what's for dinner? And there's beauty in that, because we're not mining compute power in stability of quantum qubits to have reincarnation. We're doing it because there's a thing in futurism called the Kardashev scale. And the Kardashev scale is essentially like stage 1 would be harnessing the power of our sun, which is not solar energy, it's fusion energy. So we're nowhere near stage 1. And there's 5 stages that involve navigating space-time and all of this. That's a cool map for if we want to see, are we moving forward? So there's a lot of thought behind why those 5 stages. And it's a cool thing to see, does this get us further along that or not? Have we made progress or not? Because I believe progress is possible.
Right.
So when we're in the thought tangents of the definitionally unanswerable queries, acknowledge that,
right,
and come back in. It's like every once in a while the tree's growing, we have to prune it. it's that branch is not going to bear fruit.
Mm.
But it's a good branch to know. It's a good point on the map.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the inquiry, but I also believe that the real mimetic value, like when we develop new ideas, the real value is how it helps our relationships to other people that we know are alive,
Mm-hmm.
and that we know are in this too.
Mm-hmm.
Because we may have just hit a boundary of conversation in that thread, and I apologize if that was too much velocity, but on the other side, like how many people did I lose the second I started talking a half hour ago with all my jargon, right? So I need you to help me stay in relationship with others, because I'll just go off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people like me are like, okay, how can I be of service? I can think. How can I be of service, right?
Yeah. I think exactly bringing it down to a little bit more practical, down to earth, actionable steps, let's say, for people to help them orient themselves a little bit better around what's happening, where are we headed, like what's the bigger picture, and how do I find myself, how do I orient myself around the same trajectory?
Yeah. What I heard in that was determining alignment.
Mm-hmm.
How do I find my people?
Mm-hmm.
And when I sold my house, dissolved my companies, I started wandering around, I found a lot of people that shared the same ecstatic technology as me. They were all ecstatic dancers and breath workers and like plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that I aligned with them all.
Mm-hmm.
And we all started talking about regenerative businesses and Web3 DAO governance models. And I was like, oh, that's super cool. But then I realized that there was a lot of people who just didn't align with industrial technology or didn't align with politics. They wanted to
disengage,
expatriate, as opposed to participate.
Right.
And then I found a lot of people that were just critical, and I realized that it's really easy to criticize.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, most people in the operating seat of these institutions are hypercritical of them.
Right.
And then are acting to keep the train moving, because we've got women and children out there with, struggling to put food on the table. And we've got incarceration rates through the roof. And we've got real world stuff.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, take your yoga class and breathwork session to the prisons and just get in one or two relationships with people in there. And the gift that your found technology in Bali will provide to them, if it doesn't move you, so it's not altruistic either. The value that I experienced from doing that kind of volunteer work is I get to realize who I actually am in the mirror of that relationship. That's why I keep coming back to men's work, and I'm training the new men in our dojo right now, and I'm like an assistant trainer, but I'm just in the room, and I'm seeing the difference it makes in men's lives.
What I think would also be interesting to explore the framework of maybe painting the picture of the future that is very desirable by the majority or by all, and then maybe sharing where we are today with some of the problems and how do we get there, what do we need to do to increases the chances of us manifesting that type of future.
What's Kodah Pipitone's manifesto? I already talked about energy, transportation, and consumer devices. I think that the challenge right now is nation states, like legacy nation states and borders are a useful tool, but we've also evolved beyond that.
Yes.
There was a project on Embassy of the Future, which was kind of Balaji's work. Balaji, I think Balaji something. Yeah. Really interesting thinker about network states, which already exists. Facebook could be a network state.
Okay.
But their relationship to nation states, there's a really desirable set of challenges to solve there. If I could choose what batch of social services I subscribe to with my mandatory tax dollars, and then that subscription network state contracts with the jurisdiction I'm physically in at that moment to provision medical, fire, emergency services, law enforcement. I think we actually have a really interesting market dynamic emerge around what civic and social services are actually wanted. And The cost would be we'd experience a reorganization of funding. We might see underfunded critical institutions. But the result would be either the emergence of new institutions or the negative experiences of communities that would then push us back into better choices. So one, I think there's something around the sorting functions of markets and social services through network states that I really love to see. Two is something around vital records, and that's passports and medical information being on some kind of chain and interoperable with any kind of system. I think there's a lot of economic collusion and even monopolies in that space in every country in the world that I've ever been in, and I've traveled the whole world, that I think is not good for economic opportunity. And then also not good for the functioning of these systems to actually heal people who have medical need and then build what I like to call the institutional wellness economy, which is very fragmented right now. We have no real institutional providers of wellness modalities. They're all very fragmented practitioners that are unaccredited. So that's that kind of civic and government space. I think there's some real utilities that are ready to go. Cars are underutilized assets. We don't need them to sit on driveways. And Uber is not enough of an incentive to let an Uber driver drive your car. I think there could be an interesting like convoy system and rental system and subleasing system for all cars. Turo doesn't really do it yet, but that could be a really interesting way to use the underutilized car inventory. It's privately owned, properly incentivized and insured, to bring more cars onto the roads more of the time. And then ultimately you can essentially summon a self-driving car for yourself when you need it.
As like a utility?
A utility being the infrastructure that enables that. So some hybrid of like a Turo, Uber, and then some network of convoys that navigate the main throughways. And it's a lot of people, the Norwegians are thinking about convoy infrastructure. It's not a new idea. And the people at Uber are in this conversation too. And there's a lot of financial engineering in that place that we can get into. But
I wanted to share this little thought that I've had visions of this self-driving ecosystem of cars traveling the same way how we send packets of data online is just a fully...
for sure. Automated transit. Let's just make transportation can be a global utility, and there are contractors that there are energy providers on top of the energy grid, but the grid is relatively it's public-private partnership, and then the private suppliers are on there. So there'd be private suppliers, but there can be a public infrastructure, right? So like New York City's train system was private operators, and then eventually the city of New York acquired those and built the MTA in New York City. So something like that will happen. Okay, so transportation is like that, and I think that's airline travel and nautical travel, and I think that's going to be interplanetary travel and vertical shipping, and that's maybe within our lifetimes, and I think there's a lot of folks trying to solve the competitive dynamics of that. And then I already mentioned that devices should be a utility. I think that wearable devices, just a human technology interface, it's more expensive to have an individual without connectivity than with them. And that cost shouldn't be borne by individuals. It could be borne by governments because it's cheaper for governments. Everybody has a phone. And that's like they'll get access to social services faster. And then they also have economic opportunity far greater. So a lot there.
You're saying like access to technology should be democratic. Everyone, it's a right, the birthright type thing.
Because this grid exists, and we're not going to unexist it. Then everybody has a right to touch it. And maybe there are tiered accesses that you can pay for, and there always will be, meritocracy and hierarchy, and that's important. But I do believe we're at a point where if an individual wants to access the internet, they must, and that the social good of that for education, self-directed education, will have unknown fruits, and we don't know a lot of answers. So what way to cultivate the garden of innovation than to connect more minds to more ideas faster?
Right.
So that devices and education is huge. I can talk a little bit about energy. I think that we need to move into diverse energy ecosystems faster. I think micronuclear has a huge place to play in that. I think that hydrogen is a huge role. I think that fusion is coming online. But micronuclear and microhydrogen on every city block or in every city is actually a really safe and beautiful future. When people think nuclear, they think of our technology in the 80s. It's not that anymore. It's not that at all. And also fossil fuels have a place. But should we stick a straw into our stomach and pull out the bile to to burn it? No. Like our planet is digesting fossilized carbon life, and we're pulling it up with straws. That's what fossil fuels is. That's not the best solve, but I get that it's a stopgap. I also get that there are extraplanetary fuel sources that are, the bounties are pretty objective. There's valuations on each near asteroid, and the mineral value and the fuel value of whatever's on those asteroids, and that's an interesting space to look at. I do believe we're going to be multiplanetary, and I think that's going to spur innovation for the cultivation and preservation of biodiversity on Earth. Everything that developed from the Apollo missions has pushed our economy forward, our technology forward on Earth. Same with Mars. Same with anything else, right? And there are a lot of benefits to orbital manufacturing and reentry systems that we'll realize in some of the more deep tech applications in the near future. What else can I say? I think that the ubiquitous AR, that means AR will be everywhere, less billboards and signage, but you can pay for clear skies. So imagine driving on the road and being relatively, if you're in a taxi, you'll be bombarded with ads. That's a likely near future of virtual AR ads. Now, then you pay to have no ads. I actually have very, very high conviction that's coming. And then as we move forward and have policy around billboards in general, your driving experience will, even in a private vehicle, will be similar. And then I think that there's going to be, I've written a piece about this around the tokenization of toll gates. So roads could be tokenized pretty effectively, where the more it's driven on, the more that token value of the road itself increases, and that can be liquidated to then pay for repairs on a regular basis. And there can be economic strategy to essentially make roads and bridges and trains all into these securities. And I'm not the right mind to think that through completely, but I've seen some folks working on it. There's a lot of hard token analysts, not just NFT pumpers. There's hard cryptographic engineers and analysts in the Boston and New England region that are focused on these kinds of innovations. And I think cities like Miami are actually a great city to pilot some of these programs. They have a pretty progressive department in the city. So
what would you share about the indigenous practices?
We didn't even go there. Okay. So there's an undercurrent in my journey, which we could insert earlier in the podcast if it's useful. But I started working with ceremonial plant medicine. I had my first experience when I was 18. Mild, didn't really make sense of it until years later when I started studying meditation. But I got to spend time with the Wiharika, the Huge Holes. They're a peyote community. They were traveling through Maryland when I was in Baltimore. That's where I downloaded the idea for Solyana, actually. I had this vision of a day without screens and ceremony, and I saw the beautiful jewelry, and I saw all the kids playing and then having cool shared imaginations and visions with each other while they're playing outside. And I could see them learning about plants and things and literally talking to the environment through these glasses. And I was like, that's the new earth that we're going for. And very silent flying vehicles and things.
Quiet, basically. Right.
So noise pollution must go down. For sure. So our electric vertical transit's not quite there, but there are other propulsion systems that are a little more esoteric that are known in physics. We could talk about. So the sound is a big piece. I was with the Wiharika doing that quarterly. It was very intentional, and it wasn't recreational at all. I got early that there is a sacrament, a medicine, and a drug.
Yes.
A drug changes state, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
A medicine goes from unregulated to regulated. It addresses an instance of dysregulation.
Yep.
And a sacrament's an initiatory tool.
Mm.
I then sat with Santo Daime. I had some really interesting experiences. At the time, I was still in the kind of transhumanism version of the transgender community, and had done some things with my body that, irreversible things, but I was all in. So I was, N1. I believe we can make our species better, and I was doing all the things that I've outlined today are not to be done, and I was hacking my way into being some kind of demonstration of what our technology can do, and and then the Santo Daime ceremonies just really showed me what that trajectory was leading to. And to say I died is an understatement. And I had experiences where, I literally, as real as this is real, was killed and experienced the pain of the impacts that resulted in the end of my life. And then I'm sitting there in the circle, my legs crossed, singing, and that wasn't real.
Yeah.
So I had multiple experiences of this until I finally got it. And I was afraid of ayahuasca for a while because of how violent my experiences were. And I'd seen a lot of violence when I was in the trans community and doing lobbying work there. I'd seen a lot of murders of people who were close to me. And you just learn how to navigate that. But I worked in the anti-human trafficking committee before going into entrepreneurship, and there's a lot there. So that content was clearly coming out of my body during ceremony. So I was afraid of ayahuasca, but I did it. And then I told you the story about selling my house and traveling. During that time, there were some ceremonies, different caliber of facilitators, and then I got the real thing. I went and lived with the Ashaninka, thereafter the Yawanawa in their sacred village, and thereafter was recruited by a dear brother, Loic, to come to his Sundance circle. And at the time, he invited me there. He said he invited 100 men, and I was the only one who showed up. And I had silicone breasts at the time, and I had a chest binder on, and was just putting Rogaine basically on to try and regrow my beard. And I decided to go and do the Sundance. And I understand the Sundance is, for those who don't know, you have to do a vision quest, 4 days and 4 nights, no food, no water, no contact. You're in the woods, sitting there, no sleeping. Your mind just unravels, and then after you do that, you have 30 hours of light food, and then the Sundance starts, and the Sundance is just men, 4 days and 4 nights, and you're dancing all day, stomping. In the morning, sunrise, temescal, super hot sauna with rocks, very hot, sweating, singing very loud, dancing in the sun. Then the sun goes down, temescal. 4 days and 4 nights of this. No water, drinking, no food. So I was basically what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? What can I do? Yeah. And it was I believe that I had stepped over the boundaries of what's the divine feminine experience. And I learned a lot through trying to create this new identity. We can go into what developmentally and psychologically is the root of that I believe. And we see that in their culture today. And and as a consequence of that, I had to restore balance in my life. So I had to come back into masculinity to then mirror the infraction into femininity that I had enacted. And this Sundance is that. It's the masculine initiation, where you do what you say you do when you say you do it, and you show up for these days. Your brain has no say in the matter. You just do it. Right. And on the fourth day, there's a physical offering, and I have scars on my chest from that. I'm now a third-year Sundancer, and it's very different now.
How so? Tell me.
I can just do that without fear, and I can go that time without water. I love my body, and I've now in relationship with the part of me that can go there. And it's the same part. Most men do not complete growing up. There's an initiation
Yeah.
Indigenous cultures throughout the world have initiatory practices where you become a man, from a boy to a man. We don't really have that formally in our culture. Our culture doesn't really have a consensus on what it is. We're a melting pot. So unless you're in your root culture, you don't really have something like this. So this was that for me. And once I got in touch with a part of me that could go that long without resources and could, rip off a part of my body, and go through that pain, it was the part of me that I needed to be in a relationship with. It was really the part of me that could be called upon if ever there was danger. The part of me that could be called upon if anybody I loved needed protection, needed strength. It's the part of me that would do anything to protect those I love. Wow. And that now that I'm in a relationship with that, there's responsibility. So the responsibility in this ceremony is 4 years. You do 4 years of this. And after that, you can choose to go to another circle or to keep going back to that circle. And you don't have to do an offering every year. If I choose to give it away and sponsor another man, then he starts the process. And if he doesn't complete 4 years, I complete them for him. So my bonds to my Sundance brothers, who don't all speak English, is stronger than most any man, any group of men that I have, right? And it's just a nonverbal. It's like you can't, if you see me with my shirt off, and then and the going around the community, the Indigenous community in that area. I had a couple of days after I was wearing a white shirt and they could see the blood because it was coming through the scars, and I would just go to a cafe, get a cup of coffee, and then they would be like, "No, you don't have to pay. Thank you for your service." And I got that we are keeping alive not just their culture and their practices, but masculinity. Because for whatever reason, the global culture has some strange agreement that masculinity is not valuable. And it is.
Not valuable, or they don't even recognize that there are such things as masculine and feminine, maybe. I don't know.
Perhaps. It's just a blurring of the categories. But without the masculine presence, to be honest, it's not safe. Because we still have all the faculties of enacting violence, but then we have none of the honor and none of the structure that's required to be tethered with that.
And when you spoke about now you have this responsibility, what do you do with it?
So I'm very, very involved with my men's group in Los Angeles, the Kaizen Dojo, and they came out of Est. It's in the Sterling community. And you'll see, if you look at that institute online, you'll see so much criticism, and none of those behaviors that they're criticizing are present in the actual organization. What comes up when you are confronted by masculine men in their power, everything that the culture says, danger, judgment, phobia is there. And I'm a man who went through a trans experience. And there are trans men in the group. I know, and there's homosexual men in the group. I know that that's not the case, but men in their power, we don't to not help a man unless he asks for it. That's masculine care, right? Then when he asks for it, asking for help is hard for men. And having a bunch of men who are very in their conviction, are in their strength, and organize and are where they say they are. We can form up like that. 120 men on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. in a circle is a formidable presence. And then, hey, I need help. And then boom, 5 men show up and help me, without question. That's a power, and it's a power that is a result of this type of work, and it's necessary for society, but it cannot be governed by a political institution.
Right.
It cannot be governed, it's governed by a shared code of ethics and values. And if you are in the business of aggregating power for political means, that's not, you don't want a group of men, and we're just one circle. There are hundreds of circles throughout the United States and the world in this specific framework, but there are other men's circles. And, there can be gatherings of the tribes. right? This is the kind of energy that manifests the Revolutionary War, right? This is the kind of energy that asserted itself in relation to unfair taxation from the King of England, and it's alive and well today, and it's a force for good. But if you are out of alignment with a shared definition of good, then one might frame this as a threat. So I'm very aware of what's at stake when it comes to being in my masculine.
Mm-hmm. And then would you say to step into this level of would you say that's a practice of stepping into masculinity, and this is just an extent of like...
Yeah. I would say that, yeah, it's being in my masculinity is to do with being in relationship to men and commitment. And I said free will choice earlier, and what I meant by that is we have one choice, and it's what we commit to. And once we commit, we surrender. That's where real freedom's available, through that commitment. So what I do now is I analyze, and then when I make a commitment, it's over. It's done. And that's just happening now, right? Before, I was what we call shopping. I was maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, maybe impact entrepreneur, maybe wearable devices, maybe this type of investment, maybe that type of investment. And now it's like, no, I have one family office that I'm working for right now, right? And I have a thesis on energy, transportation, and consumer devices. And people send me opportunities there, and I go to the syndicates that I work with.
Yes.
And that's it, right?
Right.
I'll talk. I have my hobbies, and I'm building the structures for my family, a future family to live within, for women in my life and children in my life to be safe.
And would you say this way of being is desirable for most, if not all, men?
Yeah, I would say that there is, because of the austerity, the comfort of the previous generations, we have enjoyed a level. The result is softness.
Yeah.
And when men don't have purpose, and we get soft like this, we resign. Video games, weed, right? It's feminine, really. And the biological differences between men and women are real, and they're important, and they're beautiful, because the depths of experience that the female system is able to go to, and then the initiation of childbirth and child rearing is the divine. And the dependency, when one is going through that process, how vulnerable they are. Males don't have that. And then just developmental genetic biologists will tell you, the second there's insemination of a embryo, sperm and egg, there's a cascade of developmental processes that all are gendered in a biological sex frame, and that continues. So androgenic or testosterone-based hormones emboss the forehead, deepen the throat, expand the rib cage, and the hands are bigger, and there's more body hair with thicker hair. That's because we are androgenic, yang energy outward. And that means go out, do stuff. Literally, like you're in the woods, brush hit your eye, it doesn't poke your eye because you have a bossed forehead, right? We're able to call loudly, so we can find people, and we're coordinated out there hunting and things. So they are real evolutionary differences. And then the communication and empathy available in a estrogenic female system is far beyond what the male system is capable of as default. There are outliers. And there's probably a hormonal correlation to those outliers and developmental correlation. But I think that when a man is outside of his masculinity, he will never compete. If a man's trying to be feminine, and we accept that meritocracy is useful in civilization society, that feminine man will never compete with a feminine female, on those metrics. And the masculine, the masculine male will. Well, the masculine female will never compete with the masculine male on those metrics. Now, throughout history, once a culture, we would call it a nation state, has solved for the rate of reproduction, units of labor are workers, and then military ability, they enjoy a level of comfort where they begin to create clear and honorable social roles outside of binary gender reproductive pairing. And those look like shaman, doulas, judges,
Mm-hmm.
dancers.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout history, the Hydra in India are doulas of birth and death. The Kathoe in Thailand are essentially embodiment healers, sexual healers and things.
Mm-hmm.
The Bisu in Indonesia are judges and arbiters. The Mahu Mahu in Hawaii are like they steward art, songs, and dance.
Mm-hmm.
And they are non-reproductive. They're not gay, they're not trans.
Right.
They're something else. And to become that an honor in society, and then the consensus of society is to value that and support that, whatever means donations to the church or government program or just loving them, is they go through a multi-year-long initiatory process through the one who came before them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are that. They don't inject a pharmaceutical hormone and have a very accelerated physical transformation to express the new brand they want to represent in the world.
Okay.
So my hope for the those who are exploring and expanding gender, because it's a necessary thing, are to find an honorable social role. Because there is a civic and social cost to your divergent behavior. I know that because there was to mine. So if there is a honorable social contribution that was available through that deviation,
Mm-hmm.
hell yeah. Like, I want to be friends with you. I want to be in support of you.
Mm-hmm.
But if one is doing it to mitigate or triage a psychiatric condition or just a lack of accountability, then I think we need to have frank conversation about the root causes, because putting on a new shirt doesn't change the root cause. Right?
Yeah.
That just becomes cosmetic, and that's great. You can morphic freedom, but it doesn't really. It's not a useful spend of government money, and you're free to spend your money how you want.
Wow.
Yeah.
Brother, thank you for such a wealth of knowledge that you carry, sharing it with me, with the audience. There's infinite amount of tangents and other directions this conversation could definitely go. I just want to be mindful of your time. I know that
we're doing good. I do have some stuff to get done, but this is a lot of fun. It's rare that I get to go all through the map, and you just let me run. So super grateful to you, brother. That was a lot of fun for me. I hope that listeners found some pieces of that are useful to chew on. I love conversations and connections, and I really love it when we can ground it in something that creates value that others can touch and really benefit from. So, I want to keep these dialogues going, and if people want to reach out, I'm an open book. Yeah,
maybe just a few last words for maybe how people how can people find you, and then also maybe the last words of encouragement or
So I have a firm and think tank. It's called Emergent Intelligence. It's just emergentintelligence.fund. On the bottom of that, you'll find my LinkedIn, the company's LinkedIn, and then there's a intake form if you want to connect. It just asks you some questions, and we have a lot of tools to help people, and then we syndicate some opportunities that I think benefit the world. I'm in Los Angeles, and I think as a final word, it's the future is ours to create, and we are in a spiritual revolution right now. We've been here before. Let's learn from the past, and let's do this right, because our children are watching. I think they're happy too. So I think they're proud of us.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.